Kristin, and you're listening to Podcast and Amplify, a podcast for women and women of color entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Hi, Kendall. Thanks for chatting with me. I want to do a quick little introduction about Kendall and who she is and why I'm talking to her today. So Kendall Cherry is the founder of the Candid Collective, and it's a copywriting studio, and she's a fantastic writer. If you don't follow her on Instagram, you should, because she has amazing stories. And I love scrolling through and reading them. And not only am I a fan, but I'm also a client. We work together on some stories that I was able to use on my social media platforms, and I can use in other places. So Kendall is a very, very talented writer. And so I wanted to talk to her about how to kind of some tips on how to write your elements for your podcast, and then even, writing for your business. And I thought she'd be the perfect person to talk to. So hi, Kendall, welcome. And did I miss anything?
No, you're just so sweet. You're so sweet. I'm so excited to be here and talk about this. It's one of my favorite things to talk about and help other people learn to do in their business, because I think a lot of people struggle when you first start a business. You don't really know anything about marketing. Most people feel very uncomfortable even talking about themselves, much less about their business idea, which is a very personal thing usually. So there's not a lot of like clear direction or like teaching on how to do that in a way that still feels really authentic and where you don't feel like you're just like slimy used car salesman. So that's something I love teaching other people. I love doing and writing things for other people, but also talking more about how to make it very approachable for anybody in business, whether it's, a founder of a big company or even, an entrepreneur who's still bootstrapping it in the beginning. I love getting to kind of have conversations like these.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to start is, do you have tips for how to create your authentic voice and not, I know a lot of people tend to like overshare because they're trying to be authentic. Yeah. And sometimes you read something and you just like cringe a little bit and you're like, oh, yeah. Too much. We
don't need to know all your shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have kind of 2 thoughts there. The first is that I think most people, in an effort to be vulnerable, they tell you like their big TMI moment because they think the more they share or the deeper of something that, or the depth of something that they share, that's what vulnerability looks like. One really quick, easy thing to do is, instead of just like, bearing your soul, a lot of times people really just want details. Instead of saying like, I walked into a room, like this is where story comes into play. Walk them through it. What did you have in your hands? What were you thinking? What would, like, things like this, like paint the picture more. And it's a great way to seem more authentic because you're actually describing your direct experience. It brings people along for the ride, and you don't have to sit there and share like your big, like whatever your traumatic thing is or whatever you're, maybe shouldn't be sharing on the internet. That's a really great way, easy hack for, I think something that I do really well and for my clients as well, is most of the time, I don't actually know like their deep stuff. Like I know some of it comes through, but most of the time what we do is we actually just describe something in more detail, and it makes people feel like they're actually there with you. Or maybe they've had an experience that looks like that or something, makes it a little bit easier to connect with versus like, any of the other like TMI kind of things you could be sharing.
Yeah, because I think sometimes that vagueness, it's like when you it doesn't put you in that story, right? And it's those little details that make you feel like you're a sense of like, oh, I'm there, like, oh, they're kind of transporting me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a great hack. And so I know that you're very inspired by music,
Mm-hmm.
which is really cool, because so much of, music is storytelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you, I guess, what would be a suggestion for ways for people to, like, I don't know, draw from their own like inspiration? Like, I know you
Mm-hmm.
have music, but some people, I think, they're just don't think they're creative, or they're
Mm-hmm.
not writers. I don't know, what are ways that maybe people can get inspired or tap into their sort of creative juices?
Yeah. I think, especially for people who are podcasting, most of the time people are guests on a podcast because, or people that are guests on a podcast, and the reason people love listening to them is because it really is telling a story. So I think some of the best things you can do to pull inspiration from your own life is to think about, man, if somebody were going to ask me about like something that happened in the last week, like what's a story or a lesson that I can pull from my last week of, something that's going on in my life, something that feels important, and draw in from that, like real tangible experiences. It doesn't have to be like the same story we've heard a dozen times. Like, I think just generally reflecting day to day, you can journal if you want to do that, or like I know some people that do voice memos and like talk to themselves, or that kind of thing. Like if you're on a walk, wear your AirPods, talk to yourself, record a voice memo. People will think you're talking on the phone. Nobody knows that you're talking to yourself. I've done this before. But it's things like that when you kind of start to look at your own day. Like if I were a guest on a podcast, what happened this week that would be interesting to talk about, I think is a really easy way to frame it up so it feels less like, you know, just heavy and like I have to have this like perfect response. People really just want to connect with the person and kind of their day to day. So I'd say probably that. And then whether it's like movies or songs or experiences that you've had, like have a list of like really big moments for you based on a song, if you have certain songs that you connect with, or maybe a trip that you took, or maybe there's a, like you have a favorite food or a favorite memory, like a family memory tied to a certain food that you love. I think having like if you think of it more as like objects that you have a story connected with, it's much easier to talk about that than think like I have to have this big story like perfectly concocted. Like if you find objects to talk about, or like albums, pieces of art, that kind of thing, it makes it a little more tangible versus I think a lot of times people get stuck in like, I have to tell a story. What is it? And instead of thinking about the actual tangible thing, kind of makes it's a little more grounding in that space.
Yeah, because the idea of writing a story, I think, can be really intimidating to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I have to create a story and there has to be an arc and there, like it just
Yeah, or
seems
like
daunting.
what's the format, and like, oh my gosh. I think also in this space, especially in podcasting and just like writing for your business in general, when you first are introduced to this world, especially when you first start a podcast, the only thing you have to compare it to is like what's out there already. So that imposter syndrome, comes in. You're like, I'm never going to be how I built this, or I'm never going to be, Girls Gotta Eat, or any of these other like big podcasts out there, because you see what has taken them years and years and years of like tweaking and refining that you'll get to eventually. But all of them kind of had a first draft, like, and it was probably pretty rough when they first started to. Nobody comes out the gate just being like, how I built this, Guy Raz, just like, rolling with it. It takes time, and it takes like iteration to really get it right.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, he has a whole team of
Exactly.
people
Like he
too, which
probably
is,
has a copywriter or like somebody on staff running that stuff. So I think a lot of times, I know when I first started, like I didn't realize how many people actually had other people on staff helping them. So I think kind of knowing that when you are first starting, it makes it feel a little less like it has to be perfect, or it has to be this like unattainable level that just takes, it truly takes like experience and episodes and figuring out your own voice, like even when you're just speaking. That's like a huge exploration. And then figuring out how to have your voice come through with your writing about the podcast episode. Like that's a whole
It's a whole
other
other
kind of
beast. Yeah.
exploration and little like project. And I'm sure everyone's like, oh, I wish I could just get it done the first day. I would, I was the same way, but it definitely is. It's worth thinking of it as kind of a creative process, just like anything. You kind of learn as you go what you like and don't like and adjust along the way.
Yeah, that's so true. I did realize that, like, oh, it's an evolution, this process. Like, it's not going to be perfect out of the gate. And then I think that bothered me a little bit because I have some perfection tendencies. But then I really started,
Yeah.
but then I really started to enjoy that part of it because I felt like it opened up creativity. Like it gave me room to like experiment and try things. So for podcasting, can you tell us, like, so I think you have kind of an interesting story around starting your podcast because you didn't listen to podcasts before you started one. Is that right?
Yeah. I still don't listen to podcasts. I will like occasionally be in the mood for one, but like I do not listen to podcasts. I remember when I first started, I like asked my like Instagram audience, I was like, hey guys, I need like the top 10 podcasts. I'm about to binge them. It was like January of 2020. It's like, I'm going to start a podcast in February. Can y'all give me your recommendations of like what I need to start and like learn and do some exploration on? Cause I just didn't listen to them. And I remember like sitting there being like, how the hell do you write a podcast intro? And I would like type out, I'm sure I still have the Google Doc somewhere of like 10 intros to be like, ooh, how are they doing this? Cause I didn't have a course like what you're creating. Like I didn't have an actual something to teach me. So I ended up like doing just like a ton of research of like, what are they saying? Like, how does it work? Cause I didn't know anything about talking about my business yet. So I kind of started with this idea of like, I don't know if I ever wanted it to be like a really big, massive thing, but it was like kind of understood the process. I knew I wanted to get into like content marketing and having the blog posts on Pinterest and all of that. So I kind of just like started and like I still listen back to some of the episodes from when I first started and it's just evolved so much even from then and like what my business looked like and it's changed a lot in the last year. But I think having those episodes, I almost think of them as like a way to document my life. Like when I first started, I was like still working my corporate job and I was like talking about why I started a business. It was totally different, especially looking back now. Like it was cool to kind of have a way to document that time in my life that doesn't really ever go away. It's not like a piece of paper that I lose, which is classic because I have a million notebooks. Like it's something that's almost like a digital archive of like my experience and like kind of where I've grown and what other people have taught me along the way as well.
Yeah, that is the nice part, that it does kind of just continue to live out there. So people can find you through that content, which is kind of nice because you don't really have to promote it. It's just like people can stumble upon you and discover you. And so that's really cool. Yeah, I did the same thing when I started my podcast. Is I did listen to, or I was already a podcast listener, but then I started listening in a different way to people's intros and like, oh, what do I want to do? How do I want to craft mine? Because similarly, I didn't have anything to, I was just kind of winging it myself and have an example. But I do remember, and I do this now too, like what you mentioned was the voice to like memo, like using your notes app. Like that is a really great like tool for, and I think I was talking to you about this early on when I started my podcast. I know I asked advice from you because you had started yours before I started mine. And like it really helps to get your casual voice because it's recording, is recording exactly what you're saying. And I think sometimes when we type things, we can edit it for reading and not for listening. So it definitely captures your voice, I think, a lot more casually, and it's not like you're reading from a script because that's like not how you want to sound.
Boring.
So, a podcast. So that's a really great tip. Do you have any other tips for creating other elements of the podcast. So did you know that a lot of successful people set their goals for the new year in September? Why? It gives them the best possible advantage in terms of accomplishing their goals for the new year. So wouldn't it be cool if 2021 was the year that you launched your podcast? Well, that's why I'm running the September is the New January flash sale from now until Friday, August 27th. I'm offering $100 off the regular price of the Podcast Accelerator 30-day bootcamp. Now, this digital course will help you start and launch your podcast in 30 days. Now, you can get this offer by clicking on the link in the show notes and using the code Accelerator. So if your business resolutions are to simplify your business, streamline your marketing, and grow your audience with potential clients, it's time to start your podcast. Okay, friend, back to the show.
So in general, I think everyone kind of has their own process that they do for like how much structure they want to have in a script when they first do an episode. When I first started, I was not sure, like, and I think it comes from, I just didn't know how podcasts were supposed to sound. So I would write out the blog post / script that I would read from. And I used to do like videos and like read from script in my corporate job. So I kind of know how to read something from a teleprompter, from a piece of paper, and throw my voice so it sounds like I'm casual, but I'm really reading it word for word.
Right.
So I when I first started, I was doing that. And then I found that what felt better for me was having like bullet points listed out of what I wanted to talk about, like a few key points, and then just kind of like riffing on that and talking about it. And then having someone or myself kind of write the blog show notes, or the podcast show notes in a blog version after, just because I tend to like think of things as I'm talking. And so I found that worked a lot better for me. I always say, in general, when it comes, if you're the type of person who's writing the show notes first and then you're going to record, start with the bullet points before you write any other part. Like, don't write the intro, because I find people usually stall out. They're like, oh, I have to write about this guest, or oh, I have to like talk about what this episode's about. Do that at the end once your juices have been flowing, and start with the bullet points that you want to make. If you're doing like a list of like top topics or tips or whatever, start with a bullet point first, because otherwise you'll be more likely to actually like write the meat of the post, versus if you're a perfectionist, like what sometimes happen to me. I know you said that as well. If I have to start with the intro, I actually will like just sit there and stare at the document, versus I always try to just like keep moving however
like
I can.
get into the meat of it. And
And if you kind of know like, oh, I can talk about, productivity tips and why I need to put a glass of water out on my nightstand beforehand, like that, the deeper content comes a lot easier. And then you can always write the summary after. But that's usually what I do. I'm trying to think like what else. Oh, editing. I know you mentioned this to me when you told me you did your first podcast episode, and then me as well. I did this. Like, I think I edited my
hours.
Yeah. I think I edited my first episode, like, and it's like a 15-minute episode, like 8 hours of editing, making sure it sounded perfect. Cause I didn't know like the level of sound quality that's out there. And like in general, you can get away with so much on a podcast. Like some people do, it is truly their phone that they've used as a voice memo, and there's no editing, and they just like throw it through. So I would say like also just pro tip, don't get too worried about editing. Like you're fine. Just put it, it's better to push publish and be like, oh man, I forgot some ums. Like it's fine.
Yeah. I think I told you, I spent like 4 hours or 6 hours, some crazy number.
It was an absurd number.
And you were like, why? I don't know.
Yeah.
Your response was
me
like,
coming
you don't
from
need to do that.
Yeah. Well, and me saying this after like 2 months from like, oh, I had the epiphany. Like, I think it kind of like comes with it. But again, to what I was saying earlier, and what it sounds like your experience too, I think I got a course from a like popular podcaster of like how to start a podcast, but it didn't tell you stuff. Like it came from someone's space where they had a team managing that. So they didn't even think to include that. Like it was very high level. Whereas I feel like if you're kind of bootstrapping it, you're doing it from the ground up on your own, stuff like that's really helpful. Like that would have saved me so much time in the beginning, like kind
Right.
of knowing like what's a real priority, what can you skimp on, what matters, um, until you can eventually like hopefully outsource it to other people. But until then, you know, if it's truly just you, like one man or one woman show, one person show, um, you know, that's when I think the guidance is really helpful, just to have like a baseline of like, here's how much time this should take, or
Right.
like, here's what needs to be included. This is a nice to have. This is dumb. You don't need to have it there. Like just those general guidelines are really helpful, I think, too.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Because I know I didn't really have a reference point, and I think when you were like asking me like, oh, why did you take, or why did it, well, that was your response. It was actually really helpful because it gave me a point of reference, like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't need to spend that much time, and it kind of gave me a little bit of permission to like, oh, okay, dial it down a little bit. You have to do
Yeah.
other things in your business. So you're right. It is nice to have just that understanding of how long things should take.
Yeah.
I do like your suggestion of doing the bullet points 100%, because sometimes I know for me, it's like that is where I start. That gets me motivated. And I do want to mention to people like, you like three is a lot. Like
Mm-hmm.
3 to 5, like, because I used to think, oh, you have to do like 10 bullet points or eight
Mm-mm.
bullet points.
Seven or
It's
less,
like,
7 or less, baby.
yeah,
And
and that's
seven if
like
they're short. 5 is the
exactly
sweet spot.
seven
Yeah.
if you're just like whipping through them. And yeah, like, you want to definitely make people feel like have people feel like you're giving them value and not, under, delivering. But yeah, I used to get hung up on that. Like, oh, I have to give so many bullet points. And it's like, well, you
Mm-hmm.
can only talk about, I mean, if your episode, if you want it to be a certain amount of time, then, you
Mm-hmm.
can't really do
Exactly.
that amount. Um, so let's see. I wanted to ask you, just to kind of wrap up, do you have like one piece of advice for anyone who is starting a podcast or even in their business, like where they should focus their energies in terms of writing? Maybe we could do business first, because that's kind of a different question,
Okay.
around, yeah, where should they kind of get the most kind of return on investment from
Mm-hmm.
writing?
Yeah, I think for me at least, I'll say my process is typically biggest ROI comes from just sharing my story. Like I think sometimes people think you have to have the like greasy salesman, like do you feel, stressed and overwhelmed? Like the very like formulaic writing. I'll share like my process when I think at this point most of my clients have come from like either my email list or from an Instagram post where I told a story. I may say like I have availability for something, but I'm not using my primary method of writing in my business as like the standard marketing, like, what is it? Activation or not it's like pain point, agitate the pain point,
Right.
whatever. There's some popular
Formula.
copywriting
Yes.
formula. Yeah. Like what for me, I think at this point, people they kind of see through it at this point and they
Mhm.
want authentic and they want to connect with the person that's behind the brand. Or if it's a service provider, they want to connect with the person who they're going to be working with. Like it's very important to like make sure that both parties kind of like know what the other person is about and what they're, I think nothing sucks more than like getting on a discovery call to maybe work with somebody and then you meet them and you're like, whoa, you don't sound anything at all like your Instagram account. Like you kind of suck. Like
Right.
I've had that happen. I've had it where I was on the other end where I looked and I was like, whoa, you're kind of not the same.
Mm.
So I think in general, like having more story, and in your story, like you can talk about things like your values, like what's important to you in your business or even in just your personal life, like things that are important to you. Because I find not everyone is like always ready to invest at that moment, but it's those people that continuously read your content and understand what you're about. And then when they eventually need what you offer, you want to be kind of when it's their right time. This is my general philosophy. Like, instead of being pushy and like trying to get people to invest, like, immediately when you say it's like your turn, or when you say it's like time for them, I prefer to kind of be a little more laissez-faire. And I figure I would rather be the person where when it's their time to invest, like they know they want to work with me. Like, there's no competition, because it's just, they know kind of in advance. And the best way to do that is through storytelling, but sharing what you believe in, your values, experiences you've had, good or bad. Maybe, again, kind of like the first question, you don't have to be TMI about it, just like walk people through a scenario. But I'd say probably that is definitely the storytelling side of things, and just sharing who you are in your way, so people get to know you more, because that's how you genuinely have like good connections with people, is when you're able to do that in your content.
Yeah. And I like your approach to getting clients, and how it seems more of like attracting, as opposed to sort of like, I need to, go get them. It's like, I'm going to put out what I'm going to put out. And if it resonates, then the right client will choose me, which I think is a great approach.
Yeah, I was going to say with that too, I think sometimes people with attraction marketing, they're like, yeah, that's great, but like, I've got to, make money and like cover my bills and that kind of thing, which I've totally been in that camp before as well. But I will say, the more you're in that kind of headspace, the more I've had moments where I've been in that headspace, really trying to like make more sales, find more leads. And I end up getting the wrong types of people, because I'm a little bit like, if my boundaries in business are like, I want to work with these types of people, they either have these types of qualities, or different things to their story, or like what their business is about. Like, if I'm not very clear on like what that is, and I'm kind of like, oh, it's fine, like I just need to like make some money, so why not, like we'll just take someone. Maybe it's not like the perfect fit, but it's like pretty okay. Those have been the moments where I've had like major issues with a client, or like it ends up not working out. So I know when you're in those moments where you're like, holy shit, I need to make a certain amount of money. It's really hard to be in the attraction marketing kind of mindset and everything. But if you can stay consistent, even when it feels like things are slow, and find a way that works for you, I find eventually I kind of think of it as like, if you were to put a penny in the jar, like eventually like it will be full, and you'll have plenty of people coming through, but it takes time to build that kind of like client base at first.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where you like attract what you're kind of putting out there. So
exactly,
then you kind of attract the maybe low energy clients, and you're compromising a little, and
then you get more people like that. Like that's what I find is like, the more I've tried to do that in the past, the more it's like I'll get like a few requests that are similar where I'm like, what? That's like not what I wanted. Like that was supposed to be a one-time thing. And then you're like, where did you guys come from? Like,
right. And you're like, oh shoot, I invited it in.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I think, doing a lot of work around your ideal client avatar is really helpful, and sticking to that as best you can. Even if things feel slow, it's still better than like having to offer a refund, which I've had to do, which has turned into a huge mess, because it's a huge cash flow like drain. Basically, so even if you do get an ideal client, like you've got a refund, you have to fund before you can pay yourself. Like that also sucks. So it's better to try and stay on top of like the type of people that you're wanting to work with, or types of businesses, or even like the values of the people that you're potentially working with, I think is important.
Yeah, I think that's excellent business advice. And what I was going to say before was, I think because storytelling is so powerful, I think, people remember how you make them feel. Mm-hmm. And exactly. It's the storytelling that really sort of like can get to the heart of someone and resonate with them. And So it to kind of have that in your mind of, how is this going to make someone feel? How is it going to resonate? How, when I share this story, instead of like, is this client going to buy from me, or is this person going to buy from me? Yeah. So yeah, that's really, thank you for sharing your experience. And of course, you're very honest and candid.
I try.
Yes. And I think those are great tips. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And I think people will definitely get a lot from our conversation.
Yeah, it was so fun to be here.
If you loved today's episode, please subscribe so you don't miss a show. And rating and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help support us. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.